today in talking about virtual media servers, what we're going to cover. The first thing that I want to say is we're not going to have you follow along. We actually have a full series of education videos for the Virtual Media Server Suite. So if you go to the website into the EOS Family Learning Series, if you look in Expert Topics, there's actually a video series that takes you step by step how to do all this stuff. So the first half of this presentation is just going to be a quick review of that stuff. So that will allow you to just catch up so we can all be on the same page. And then we're going to go into sort of a demo and show and tell side. So if you're looking for more instruction, how to, go ahead and hop over to those videos when you get a chance. The first kind of stuff that I want to go through on our PowerPoint side is sort of the purpose and overview of the Virtual Media Server Suite, why we did it, how it came into being. We're also going to talk a little bit about the installation process. There's some things in there that you'll want to know about installing it. We'll spend a decent amount of time talking about media and content organization, bringing in custom media, moving stuff around, dealing with multi-console systems, and the like. And then there's a little thing that I want to cover about kind of how EOS works with output and some of the caveats that are associated with that. A lot of the questions we get around virtual media servers kind of fall under that heading. So I wanted to address that. So we're going to go through all the PowerPoint stuff first. It's probably going to be a little bit of a long haul, but then we're going to break for some Q&A. And then we're going to pop into EOS software. I'm going to screen share with you. And we're going to do sort of a trade show demo, right? I just want to take you from a blank show file, really quickly build a pixel map. And that is going to, again, allow us to really see what's going on and be on the same page. And then Scott and Rob and I are going to have a little bit of a hackathon. Scott has prepped a little demo show file that he's going to show us some of the things, talk about how and why you would use these features, and obviously answer your questions. So you know, let's get through the boring stuff, my part first, so we can get to the good stuff in a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about why we did Virtual Media Server. EOS 195, which is when VMS was introduced, was released in 2010, which, you know, depending on the day, especially lately, feels like it was only a week ago and feels like it was 8 decades ago. But you know, not to be too humble, it also won the LDI's Product of the Year award that year. So you know, software winning Product of the Year awards, pretty awesome. But the intent of it was there's a lot of space between having absolutely nothing and having a full tilt $30,000 media server. And media servers are still really viable, right? VMS was not designed to replace a media server. Media servers can do a lot of really intricate, complicated work. They can do really interesting integrations with 3D spaces and cameras and all sorts of fun stuff. But we viewed that there was a lot of space to be able to take content, media, images, mathematically generated things, and apply them to a lighting rig. And so that's really where VMS fits in, right? So it's a simplified set of tools. It's not going to cover all the same things that your media server can do, but the functions that it does have, we tried to mimic how a media server functions. So you'll see a lot of the ways that we take our tools, we focus them in the same way that we would if we were controlling a media server that's an external box, right? So that was a key tool. The rough job of a media server is to play video over fixtures, right? So we can take content and get it moving over fixtures. But as I'm sure Scott will talk more about later on, it can also act as another effects engine, right? We don't have to be just looking at a back wall of pixels and see an image like a spiral or something. We might map our downlight and get, you know, some soft water effects that may take a long time to program through the traditional effects engine. We may just do a single pixel line for our LED cyc to get some movement or some chases or something that, again, would just be more time consuming in a traditional effects engine. So you don't always have to think about it as needing to be able to discernibly see content. You can think about the way that it offers movement and changes dynamically to a set of fixtures. It's good to know that pixel mapping works on not only color changing fixtures, but also fixtures with just intensities, right? So if you've got, a wall of A lamps, you could run an effect on that, and your video content is translated into brightness for those sorts of functions. So it's pretty versatile. We do use, like media servers, a server and layer structure, right? So there's a master layer, and there's individual layers, similar to something like Photoshop or CAD. So the server are parameters that are going to affect or override all of the content layers. So anything you do at the server level is going to make adjustments on sort of a global scale with all the content that's being provided. And then below that, we have a layer, and a layer provides individual content effects and has some local overrides to do stuff with just that layer. So when we stack that stuff up, this is kind of how a structure like that may look, right? We've got server with multiple layers below it. For virtual media server, again, we're not trying to replace a full tilt media server. We give you the ability to create 40 pixel maps. And there's a couple of reasons why we would have multiple pixel maps. Sometimes we have different pieces of scenery that are on stage at different parts of the show that we want to be able to control. Sometimes we want to be able to control different components of the same rig and then one large map to control all of them. So I think we'll talk more about this in Q&A. You can have multiple maps that talk to the same lights, or you can keep them separate. So between multiple media servers, pixel maps, and multiple layers, we have the ability to segregate what portions of the rig we're controlling with each map. Each pixel map has a maximum of 12 layers. We have two types of layers, which we'll talk about in the demo. One is content-based, one is generative, it's math-based. And each pixel map can have a little over 16,000 individual pixels. And if it's square, that's 128 by 128 pixels. So, that's a fairly decent size to control. But again, if you need to do something that's larger or crazy, maybe a media server will handle that kind of stuff for you better. And we still see a lot of shows that certainly move that route. Something to know about your Element series of stuff. If you're in Element or Element on Nomad, we still give you virtual media server, but you have just a single one. You don't have multiple media servers. Again, Element has a truncated set of features, and so this is one of those. But it does have the same layer and pixel limit. So this is great if you're producing a show on Element and you just need a little bit of that access. It's really important to know if you're bringing a show file from upper family products down to an Element. You're not going to have all of the same content, and that may affect playback. So just be really cautious when you're moving through the family. Just a couple of other quick things. When we deal with layers, the higher channel number is actually on top, right? So if I've got channels, 5, 6, 7, 8, channel 8 is on top. So anything that's in channel 8 will block any layers below it. So just be aware of that. We'll look at that when we look at some demos. And a key thing that we'll kind of talk about throughout today is that when you're dealing with media layers, intensity is opacity, right? How transparent or how solid is something. So when we talk about stacking layers and fading things between layers, think of intensity as opacity. And again, if you go through those instructional videos, that will show you some of the ways that those interact in more detail. I want to talk about the installation process really quickly because it is a separate installer. So Virtual Media Server has a separate installer from EOS Software. So if you are on a brand new laptop that you just bought, and you download the EOS family software and you install it, you don't have access to the virtual media server stuff in its entirety. And that was really designed because we didn't want to burden the installation package for forever, right? The installer comes with media and drivers, and so that's a pretty big package to carry around all the time. So that's why we made the decision to make it a separate installer. Any ETC-made device, so any console, any puck, any project PC that has stuff installed, if it was manufactured basically after 2010, it has the VMS installed in it. So it's not something that you have to worry about. What we really have to worry about it for nowadays is Nomad. Again, I get a new computer, I'm moving computers, I'm installing a Nomad rig in a space. If I want to use these features, I need to make sure that I have that separate installer. And it must be manually installed on all the devices. When you download it and install it, it doesn't support the auto update function like EOS software does. So just be aware of that. If there's, again, 5 computers that you're putting into a multi-Nomad system, you'll need to make sure it is manually installed on all of those devices. So to find it, go to our website, go to any EOS tab, any console tab, and in the software area, you'll see that there are PixelMap installers. And again, what that's doing to do is just install, we give you a library of media to play with, and it will also install some of the drivers that are required to play back that media. So there you go. Just be aware, sometimes if you get a blank screen or your media isn't showing up, especially on a laptop, you'll just need to make sure that PixelMaps has been installed. Moving on to media organization, there are a couple things that I want to cover in here. First is sort of the way that we structure things. If you look in the media file, you'll notice that we structure our library much like a lot of other media servers do. So it's technically 16-bit, meaning it uses 2 parameters, one for coarse and one for fine. The coarse is being your folders. So because DMX has 256 steps available in it, you have 256 folders, numbered 0 to 255. And in each one of those folders, you can have up to 256 pieces of content. So the coarse and fine, similar to how a pan and tilt 16-bit parameter works, is exactly how we find media. And with multiple files in a single folder, times the number of folders you have, that gives you a little over 65,000 slots that you can put in media. This is a lot, right? You've got a lot of space, and I think there are other considerations if you're getting to a show file that is needing that much content. Maybe this is time to look at a media server. But we have plenty of places to help you organize that. The folder 0 contains all the default stuff that we provide. So again, it's a little over 250 files, I believe. Maybe it's about 200 that are rights-free. So these are things that you can use in production, and they're good to go. Depending on the resolution and depending on where you're at, if you're downloading content from somewhere else, you may need to be concerned about obtaining rights because you are projecting work of someone else. So just be aware. But these are rights-free images and files so that we allow you to use those to play around. So if you do want to import custom media, again, we have all of those other slots that you can bring stuff in. And in the browser area, if you go to import and into PixelMap Media, you get a tree that allows you to do it in 2 different ways. And the first way is I just want to bring in all PixelMap Media. What this does when you select it is it brings up a little dialog box that says, what do you want to bring in? I had selected my Space Wizard image because why not? So this gives you the ability to choose what library folder it's going in, what file slot it's going in, and whether, I think one of the biggest things is whether or not you want to overwrite this content, right? If there's content already in the folder, do you want this to overwrite those slots or do you not? Things like reordering libraries and reordering files, those decide if your files and your folders already have a numbered structure. Is it going to remove that numbered structure and just put them in the lowest slots available? Or is it going to keep them in their current location? So you can import a bunch of different content, whole folders at a time. You import that in, and now that lives in the library in the slots that you have allocated. The other way that we handle this is exporting what we call show pixel map media. When you're done with your process, when you've built a show file, it's in the can, everything's happy, you want to take it on tour, you want to make sure you're documenting it, all of that stuff. What show pixel map media does is it will export just the files that you used. So it scans the show file, it sees what files are used in queues, in subs, in presets, and palettes, and any file that it sees that's used and stored in the show, it will save that in its folder and in its file slot. The idea being that you can save that pixel map media for the show, and then you go to the next town where you're touring, you can open your show file on that EOS, and you can import the show pixel map media, and that will put in the stuff that's used for your show file and make sure that your show file plays back appropriately. So all pixel map media is a way to get new stuff in. Show pixel map media is a way to take that stuff and make it portable so you can tour it or archive it. And that basically just says what I just said. It's important to remember when you're moving media or even in a multi-console system that EOS in the show file, much like a gobo wheel or a color chip wheel or a scroller slot, we're only recording the slot ID. We're only saving the number. So for example, if I were to store this into my show file right now, all EOS is going to remember is that it's folder 3, file 114, right? It doesn't remember what media it is. It doesn't care what media it is. It knows that when it goes to access this through playback again, it's going to go to folder 3, slot 114, and play whatever's there. And this is really, really important because this puts a lot of management on you in order to make sure that your show file plays back correctly. The way that EOS is actually handling this is we are, because of this, rendering that video on the local device. So instead of trying to render the media on the primary, for example, and then distribute that streaming video out over the network to all of your RVIs and your backup, we're relying on each local device to do that. And so it means that all of the folders and that whole library needs to be synchronized between all of your devices, right? So it doesn't know if there's media in that slot. And oftentimes we'll see this where someone will bring in a Nomad computer as a remote video device, plug it into the system, you're playing a pixel map on your console, and it's just blank on the laptop. And that's because that laptop doesn't have any media installed. So it's playing library folder 3 and slot 114, and there's nothing there. So I think this is one of the bigger challenges of this service if you're going to be moving media around or if you're going to be in a multi-console environment. And just to make it sort of visual as a quick example, you can see if I've got on my primary console, playing my tree look, whatever that is, right? If my RVI has a different piece of media in the exact same slot, it's going to show up differently. In the example that I've been using where my primary is rendering one media piece of content and my my RVI is rendering something different, that's annoying because the designer is seeing something different. But because the primary, my trees, is what's outputting to the stage, it's going to continue to look the same on stage as it does on my console. It's more difficult and harder to sort of see if you are in a primary and backup situation, right? So let's say now that my trees are my primary, I'm going through my tech process, everything's great, everything looks fabulous. I save my file, and we're in show run. Now something happens, somebody spills a Coke on my primary halfway through a show, my backup takes over, and it has a different piece of media. It's now outputting to the rig. That cue is going to look different, right? So you got to be really, really careful moving media around. The media, the folder 0, is the same on every device universally, unless you've gone in and modified it. So I know a lot of people that like to try and stick with those files because it ensures that if media is installed on any device, it's going to be the same and playback same. But if you're installing custom media, if you're bringing in custom images, you need to be aware of this caveat. And this is just to say it bluntly, EOS is not synchronizing the media across the network, right? So again, you're having to load this media on each individual device. So if I change a slot on my local primary, my EOS, I need to go around each and every device and make that change and upload that media. So if I've got 5 devices in my system, that means I need to upload that media 5 times. Yes, this is burdensome. I get it. This is the way that it works currently. So be aware that if you're bringing in customized media, you need to go through every single device and make sure that it's uploaded. Okay. So carry your files manually. You know, it's pretty easy to export show file media again and bring it space to space to space. So use the tools that are there. There are some ways to maybe make this a little easier that aren't ETC supported, but are things that we know how to do. So in the hackathon, we should talk a little bit more about keeping your library synchronized. So that's that. The last section that I want to go through before we get to questions is just an overview of how EOS deals with output. And I want to go through this because it really has to do with displays, and we get a lot of questions about why some things function the way that they do. So I just want to take you through some really poorly laid out PowerPoint graphics, but I think they get the point across, and I think that will tee us up to have a discussion about why some displays work the way that they do and ways to get around it. So this is what I like to call an oversimplification of EOS processes. Basically what we have is we have our channel and our levels data, right? Things that are coming from queues, things that are coming from manual data, things that are coming from subs and playbacks. This is just stuff that is trying to start making its way out of the desk into the rig. And there's a big chunk of software that you'll often hear referred to as the fade engine. And the fade engine is what processes all sorts of stuff like calculating fades over time, dealing with effects and their contributions, their overrides, dealing with arbitration between multiple sources that are trying to fight for the same channel and parameter, and dealing with things like overrides. So that allows you to, the fade engine allows everything to kind of come in, get dealt with, and then get slimmed down to start making its way to individual DMX addresses. The last stop on that arbitration is parked and shielded subs. So this is sort of the final stop on data leaving your console. And then we go to output, right? We've left the desk, we're in DMX or ACN values or ArtNet values, we're out on the rig, the desk has output what it needs to for the fixtures to receive and respond it. When we implemented virtual media servers, one of the ways that we reduced the output, or excuse me, the taxation that VMS takes on the processor is by not putting it through the fade engine. The fade engine, as it kind of leads to, is really complicated, right? And it requires a lot of overhead and processing power in order to make all those calculations real time. So VMS, because it's video, RGB, Basically, we inject it kind of after the fade engine, and then the only thing that can really override that sort of stuff is things like a parked address or those sorts of things. So the fade engine and all of the things that it does really has no knowledge of what this virtual media server is contributing. So the brain of EOS, the how does it know what everything's doing, VMS is not a part of that. And the biggest question we get is, why can't I see what my fixture is actually doing on output, right? So inside the desk, I have no way to see what everything's going on. I look at my Magic Sheet, and it's not showing me what my virtual media server is doing. And that's because Magic Sheets are displaying desk channels. They're displaying the contribution of things from the fade engine, right? So when you get something like a color chip preview, what you're actually seeing is not the information that's going out to the rig, you're seeing what the fade engine is providing. And that allows us to show you that sort of stuff in blind. That allows us to give you previews of those things, to sort of see what the desk thinks that color is going to be. But the virtual media server is not part of that contribution. Similarly, when we look at PixMap Preview in a few minutes, PixMap Preview has no idea what desk channels are doing, right? So if you open that tab and see what your pixel map is contributing, it's only getting its information from the virtual media server. And so these two things are kind of disparate right now, just by the way VMS was put into the code. And that was to save resources on hardware. So there is a little bit of a hack that was put in a while ago, which is in a Magic Sheet, you can actually sample the output of the rig if you're on a network with an ACN Magic Sheet object, and that will be able to actually show you what's going on. Scott will take you through kind of what that is and what it looks like in his section. But basically, if you have certain types of fixtures, we can kind of have you build a new pixel map preview, and it will show you what the desk channels and the pixel maps are contributing to. Sort of a sidebar, EOS 3.0 is bringing in Augmented, and one of the key things of Augmented, which is a 3D environment, is that you need to be able to see what the fixture is actually going to do. So for a while, we've been ignoring a lot of things that we kind of didn't want to deal with. You know, what is through a moving light? What is a mixed flag system plus a chip actually output? We've never really calculated that. You know, what happens when you have desk channel contribution and ACN contribution from PixMaps? We've never really shown that. Because Augmented has to show what's going to be in reality, I think in future development, you'll start to see a little bit more of this stuff come together. The fade engine needs to start understanding what VMS is contributing, and I know that the developers have talked about how they might kind of start to reroute VMS through the fade engine. This is really complicated. It's something that will probably take a while for us to get to. But it opens up a door that we haven't had before and a need that we have that will hopefully move this forward. So kind of keep an eye on stuff coming forward. This is a really complicated chart, but hopefully in the future it will be simplified a bit more. So the next thing that I want to do is go out into EOS and kind of do a demo, just a quick ground up, what I call a trade show demo, just a little 10-15 minute thing. But first, before we go into that, Ginger, who's on the phone lines, what kinds of questions we have going on?
Hey Nick, we got a few questions here.
Great.
Let's see. So Tony asked if a Nomad is a client station on a network where the primary and the backup RPUs have virtual media installed. Does the Nomad client need to have virtual media installed?
Yeah, good question. Hi, Tony. Good to see you. The short answer is no, if you don't expect to use VMS or access VMS at that location, right? So again, if you were to open up the PixelMap tab, then you wouldn't see anything because it doesn't have the files installed. So as long as you don't expect to access those there, that's totally fine. It's about a 200 meg installer, so it's not massive in the world of files. I would think that a good practice would be to have it, but I know Tony works a lot in studios, so it may be that certain clients don't need it because they're only accessing Magic Sheets or whatever. But just in case, it doesn't hurt to install it, I don't think. So good question.
All right, going on. We have one about how does it sort them on the reorder? So that was back.
Yeah, basically if you bring in stuff on a reorder, it's just going to compress everything to the lowest numbers. So if you're bringing in, folders that are libraries 5, 7, and 10, it's going to make those libraries 1, 2, and 3. So it just tries to compress everything. You can, the way that we look at files is we look at there needs to be numbers first. So the folders have to have a 3-digit number, 000 through 255. And then behind it, we don't care. If we don't see those values, we're going to add that to the folder name on import for our library. Similar with files, right? We need a 000 through 255, and then the label or whatever can be behind that. If we don't see that as part of the file, we're going to do that for you. So again, if you want to preserve your order or keep them in slots that aren't ordered, then go ahead and pre-number them and bring them in that way.
Cool. This was a question that John had, which Rob and I were chatting about earlier, and we're interested in the answer as well. What does FIP mean?
I just saw that come through too. I don't know. It's file something. It came into the software a little while ago, and I don't remember exactly what it means. We're going to say file in place because I'm making it up.
Yeah, I actually.
That's what we made up as well.
Yeah.
So we agree on the made up name.
Yeah. I always call them flops because, again, if you think about it like a 16-bit parameter, a file can't exist by itself. You have to also be referencing a folder. So kind of think of it that way. But I'll try and see if I can look that up. I don't remember.
I can tell you it's not in the manual. The last tech writer was lousy. All right, another question. Is there a way to import media at the File Explorer level, or do you have to do it through EOS? So I'm guessing that means the File Explorer if you're running Nomad through PC.
Yeah, this kind of leads into what we'll talk about in our hackathon. If you're on a Nomad, right? If you're on a computer that's running Nomad software, we build a file archive which has 3 folders in 3.0. There's a show file archive, which is where your EOS show files get stored automatically. There's a media archive, which is where all of this folder structure is. And we can look at mine on my desktop if you want to in a little bit. And then in 3.0, there's a model archive, which is where all your augmented models live. So you can go through File Explorer or on Mac through Finder and access that place and do any of the modifications that you would do as if it were normal folders. So yeah, you can do that. It's pretty easy. When you're dealing with it on a console, if you're in the software, you need to import it through the tool that I showed you. And that can be a bit laborious if you're bringing in a lot of stuff. But also, you can go out into the shell and use the File Explorer that's out there to bring in some more stuff and have a little bit more control. There's a way to sneak in the back door, which we'll talk about in sort of the virtual media server after dark portion of this. Again, not ETC supported, but a hack that we found a while ago to help you manage files in the background. So good question. It's on my mind right now. One of the things that we want to talk about, and I think maybe Scott will cover a little bit about this too, when you're importing custom media, you really need to think about what you're doing with that media. Can you import the full-length Director's Cut Lord of the Rings in 1080p onto your EOS console and use that as part of your pixel mapping? Yes, you can. If you're dealing with a 6x6 grid, what's 6x6 pixels on like one of these things, right? So you need to think about the scale and the scope of your media, and you have to understand that processing media takes resources away from something else on a console. So if I'm running effects, if I'm running chases, if I'm running complex fade or color paths or other things, if I'm chunking away at this big media file, EOS isn't meant to do that. And if you need those bigger files, maybe you need to consider going to a media server, right? EOS is a light board. This is a little component that helps fill the space between you need to get up to a media server. So if you're going to do a Tom Stoppard piece and you think you need to bring in 600 pieces of media, I'd really want to know why you feel that way, right? So, really be intentional. Scale your media off of the console before you bring it in, right? Again, even if you have a huge wall, if you've got like a back wall and it's like 50 by 200 pixels, that's a pretty big install for a lot of theaters. That is still 50 by 200 pixels in a full res video is super tiny. So think about what you want to do and what you're trying to handle and what EOS is capable of. So I often find that, and when we look at the little demo, you can do a lot of generative stuff, which is math-based, which doesn't require video, which is a lot easier on the processor. It does a lot of stuff. A lot of the base content gets you a lot of the way there, too. Images get you a lot of the way there with some of the other animations. So I really encourage you to think tough and hard about wanting to bring in 8,000 pieces of media because you're going to use Virtual Media Server. Scott?
Yeah, and kind of on that front, if there's a way you can create a single piece of content by using 2 layers stacked on top of each other, maybe that's a better way of doing it than creating custom content, importing it, and having to deal with all the extra stuff that comes with that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that that's something we can talk about when we get into more like practicality of it. But again, at the end of the day, what are you trying to do with the content? And be really intentional about that ahead of time. Oftentimes what we're getting requests for from the design team, and maybe we should say, I'll tee us up and we'll table this conversation. But from the design team, oftentimes the lighting designer's going, oh, video's doing that thing over there. I want a little flavor of that. I want some of that in my stuff. There are ways to handle that, and there are ways to not bring in full res video that the video team is using and still get some of the sauce that they are doing. So there you go. Long answer to a short question. My favorite.
So this was a bit more of a comment, but I think it's a good thing to address why we don't necessarily do it this way. The comment is it would be really cool to have a utility that would push the media out to all devices so they are the same.
Yes, it would be cool. Stay tuned to EOS After Dark. But the reason that we did this, you got to remember in 2010, we were still on EOS Classic hardware. Ion Classic was there. So that was kind of a thing. So we were really concerned about resources. We were also concerned about 10/100 networks. So synchronizing large media files, when we were developing this in 2009 and 2010, resources were a really big concern. What I think you will see is because of Augmented and because we are now 10 years later, networks have gotten stronger. Processors for our consoles that we sell now are heftier. And with 3.0, Augmented models are part of the show file and we're having to synchronize over the network. So now we're getting comfortable with thinking large chunks of files over the network, maybe in the background a little slower so that they don't take up as much network resources and things like that. So the reason we made that decision 10 years ago, I think, is valid. And we haven't really touched it since then, that structure of pixel mapping, the synchronization. We know that it's a lot of overhead. It is really, really difficult to keep this stuff managed in an ETC certified way. I think, again, that because Augmented has brought some other things into the mix that we hadn't quite tackled yet, maybe in the future that stuff will be easier for us to look into, to where you pull in a file from your RVI and it's automatically on all your devices or whatever. It's definitely what we want. We don't think that this is perfect by any means, but that's why we are where we are. So good question, good comment. Hopefully in the future.
Brad is wondering, are pixel maps limited by the output count of the console?
Yep, absolutely. So we're going to talk about channels versus addresses in my little demo. But yeah, you still have the same amount of addresses you have. If you patch that as a desk channel in your pixel map, it doesn't double count. If I've got an RGB fixture as a desk channel and I've got it as a pixel map, that's still 3 addresses. So we're not double dinging you for that. But if you do put in something that's just addresses that's in your pixel map, it will count toward that address output if it's different from the addresses that are patched somewhere else. So you are limited by that.
All right, going on. Can EOS control media going to a projector?
No. So good question. I should have put that in the intro. EOS only controls things that are DMX controlled, basically, or ACN controlled. We are outputting DMX, ACN, ARNet, lighting level protocols. We are not talking video. If you need video output, there's plenty of media servers that are happy to take your money.
All right. This one is, what is the recommended video file formats?
Good question. The secret is that we use QuickTime under the hood to render these videos. So anything that Apple QuickTime supports, go to town.
Yeah, there's a long list in the manual. So
yes. Yes, Ginger typed that in. So
I did. That is all me. Yeah, the file formats for images and video and all that's included in the manual.
Yeah, so the manual has a lot of good stuff. And again, we have a workbook and videos available that cover a lot more of those details. So, and again, I always leave my email at the end of this. If you have any questions that aren't addressed there, be in touch, and I'm happy to help you answer them. So.
Is there a limit on what file size the console can handle?
Probably. I know that we bring in all the formats that QuickTime can natively handle, and I would imagine that what I don't know, basically you're limited by your hard drive space. What I don't know is if there's a limit when you're going to import, if we see a file that's of a certain size that we won't let you import. I've never encountered that. Scott, is that something you've ever encountered?
I've never tried doing like full HD or anything, but if I'm trying to play back content, you don't want, as Nick was saying, full HD or anything typically even above 1,000 by 1,000. So it's not really a limit that I've run into. Yeah,
and I think that's really a good point, is that, like, I'm sure there is a limit up there, but do you need to be bringing in content of that size? If you do, you probably need a media server. So, and that's okay. We're okay with that. We want to do a few more?
Yeah, we got a couple more here. Do pixel maps need to be rectangular?
They do not. So I'm going to do a quick little demo of pixel maps. I'm going to do a rectangle because it's easy. But you can basically drag the individual pixels to make it represent what the lights look like in space, right? One of the things, if you've played with our Mind the Gap training file, the expert topics show file, have we put that out somewhere? The expert topics show file has a patch for virtual media servers in it. If that isn't up, we'll find a way to get you the patch. But it has a grid in the back, and it also has the MTG letters that also have little RGB pucks in them. So that would be an example where we would make a pixel map that laid out like those letters. I'll try and do a little demo-y of that if we have some time But yeah, you're limited to a grid. You're not limited to a square.
Got two more here.
Oh, great.
I think we may have previously answered this one a little bit, but can you play animated GIFs? Which GIF is a supported file format.
Yeah, yep, exactly. So GIFs are a part of that.
And then last one, would having a NAS on the network for the media work, or does EOS live stream the files from the storage volume? Yeah,
good question. A network-attached storage drive is something that we allow you to map as a remote storage location. That just shows up as a secondary drive, and we don't do anything with it other than use it for remote storage. So no, while you could back up that media to the network-attached storage drive through your file explorer, it's not going to pull that media from that drive. So that might be an easy way to synchronize media in an ETC supported way. Is let's say you've got 5 consoles in your network, and you've got one network attached storage drive that all of them have mapped. You could, on each device, access that drive, copy over the files, and they'd be all synchronized. That needs to be done on every device, and that needs to be done every time there's a change. So doable, ETC supported. There's a different way if you're having dynamic changes to your thing, which we will discuss in the non-sanctioned version of this chat. It's going to sound so scandalous, and it's really not. So.
All right, we have one more that just came in. Is there a way to get the thumbnails large, all caps, and on a Magic Sheet in a similar way to Gobo files being available?
Yeah. Hey, Matt. Good to see you. Not currently. That is a request that I've had for a while to be able to put those thumbnails in just like they show up. We auto-index those Gobo images for you. Yeah, there's a lot of decision making behind that, especially if devices are out of sync. So I think that will wait probably until after we have network synchronization, just because of some of the details that come up. One of the things that has been one of my side projects that maybe now that we have a little bit more time on our hands, I'll be able to get to, is I've wanted to post in the EOS Dropbox. I wanted to get higher res files of the thumbnails and just post those as a folder for the default objects. So maybe I'll get on that now that I've said it publicly.
You're stuck now.
Question. That would at least give you some larger res options for the default stuff. So, but good question.
Very cool. Well, thank you, Nick. That's all the questions we've got right now.
Great. So why don't we hop into just a quick demo. I am going to take you from a blank show file. I'm going to just walk you through quickly setting it up. And Rob will correct me when I miss stuff, I'm sure. And yeah, we'll see kind of how easy it is. As questions come up, we can certainly dig into them. So let's go to demo time. Let me see if I can do this. You can see my Minecraft desktop because I'm a nerd. So this is a brand new show file, just fresh out of the box. So there's a couple of screens that we're going to go through really quickly that I think are useful for pixel mapping and can make your life a little bit easier. So on my second workspace, the first thing I did was I opened the Pixel Map tab, right? So your Pixel Map tab here is where you actually set up your pixel map. And so really what we're going to do is we're going to have a 2D space, and we need to tell the console the relationship of those fixtures to one another, right? So you can kind of think about this as a 2D augmented thing that was made 10 years ago. The board needs to know that this light is next to this light, is above that light, is over to this light, so that when we do put media on it, it knows where to route all that data. Before I do that, I want to patch some real fixtures. So I'm going to go into patch really quick. And in my rig, let's say, I'm going to use my Mind the Gap channels, just so if you're watching this later, you can play along. But 701 through 884, those are my channels that are my pucks on the back wall, right? I've got a grid of RGB LED fixtures. So I'm going to change those to be generic LED RGB 8-bit. See if I can minimize the search a bit. Generic LED RGB 8-bit. Great. And those are at Universe 20 address 1. So those are patched. Those are real channels. I can go out to live. I can control them. They're desk channels. They're super happy. So having those channels now, if I go back into my pixel map, when I go to edit this, what I want to do in similar views like queue lists and show control lists, the big portion is on the bottom, the list is on the bottom, and then the contents are on top. It's the same here. So what you're going to see is if I hit 1 enter, that's going to create pixel map 1, and then I have my editor up above that. I have what I call the staging area. So this is just the area that I'm going to see in my pixel map preview. That's where it's going to render video, right? I can have channels and pixels outside of this space, but it's not going to render video on them. So that can be intentional, that can be unintentional, but just be aware that you have to have sort of this blue area. You've got the ability to set width and height. So if I want to make this 50 wide and 12 high or whatever, that's totally fine. I like to leave a little bit of space in my pixel map for a couple of reasons. We'll talk about introducing air between pixels in a second and what that does to your video playback. But also when you're looking at your pixel map preview, you can see stuff that's off of your screen, right? You can see your video, be like, oh, there's something really interesting going on that's not playing back on my pixels. I'm going to move my video so that that thing is now on stage. So that's one of the reasons why I like to have a little bit of extra space. Basically, I need to come down and hit my Edit Soft key. And when I do that, I get Patch, right? I get the ability to come in with channels that are here, or excuse me, profiles that are in my show. I've got my manufacturer, I've got my search. This is just the same area of patch. So I have 2 ways that I can add a light. If I select a pixel, so let's say I want to put a channel there, I can say I want that to be an LED RGB, and I can put it at a start address, right? So that's at 1/1 or whatever. This is just an address, so I can't actually control this light through a desk channel, right? It's only here. Only if I run video over it can it be accessible. That used to be one of the only ways we allowed you to do it, and I think it's a little limiting. There are certain reasons why you might want to do it, but what is more useful, I think, I'm going to hit the delete button to delete that, is to bring something in as a channel. So again, I select a pixel, I say start channel, and if I hit 1, that's going to make that channel 1 for me. So now, whatever fixture is patched to channel 1, I don't care about the address, I don't care about the profile, I can change the profile. I just know that channel 1 is always going to be in that spot. So I'm going to hit delete really quick. The other thing when you're adding stuff is you can add whole channels or you can add cells. So keep an eye on this, whether you're mapping individual channels or whether you're mapping cells. Your third option is also fixtures. So if you do have a channel that has multiple cells, you can patch the whole thing as just one. And that's where maybe multiple maps is interesting. You have the same fixtures. One map talks to the cells, the other map talks to the whole fixture. Just by controlling them with the same content with different maps, you'll get really different results. So that's something to kind of play with if you've got multi-cell fixtures, which is fun. The rest of the stuff that's in here just allows us to decide if we have multiple cells selected or multiple pixels selected, how they're going to propagate. So you can see sort of this Z here. That will give me an example of, and I happen to know that my pixel back wall for Mind the Gap is 8 tall by 23 wide. So you can see I kind of get XY things here, but if I click and hold, my yellow is going to show me how much I have selected. So I'm going to go 8 high, and I'm going to go 23 wide. Neat. So that's going to give me how many channels I actually have in my show file. The way that this is addressed, the way that I set it up in the show file, is they don't actually channel across top to bottom. I have them channeling down top to bottom. So I need to adjust this if I'm going to have these all automatically patched together. So I'm going to change my direction to columns, and you'll see that will do it. And I can select whether it goes top to bottom, left to right. All those can be adjusted. But this actually matches the way that I have these fixtures channeled. So one of the things to think about when you're planning channels in a pixel map is bringing some order to them, so setting this sort of thing up can be easy. So I'm going to do the same thing with my start channel, but because I have these channels, I'm going to start it at channel 701, map to fixtures, and when I hit apply, you'll notice when I zoom in, I get all of these individual channels. And there's actually a little bug right here in the code that I know about. If I hit done, they turn purple, and then I go back into the editor. They're supposed to turn purple as soon as I put them in, because as you can see by the key here, purple shows channels that are patched, gray shows channels but have no patch to them. So just be aware if you're going to play, that's a known bug, it's on the list, we'll get to it when we can get to it. So now that those channels are in there, I can make this look like how my pixel map looks on stage. Again, if that means that they're shaped like the letters MTG, or if I have diagonals or whatever, I can move these things around once they're in my staging area. Clicking and dragging, right? As soon as you touch something, it will grab it. If you go the other way, it's the same thing, right? So just be cautious about trying to grab if you want to grab a row of fixtures or just a single fixture. One of the things that I will see people do often is these pixels can technically be stretched. That means that the fixture maybe is bigger. It's not going to give you 4 cells worth of playback. It's just a visual way for you to represent that. But sometimes you can go over top of other fixtures and hide them. So just be cautious about that. So when you're laying out a map, sometimes we have spacing between pixels. And what I've seen people do is play video content and have really choppy results. And that's because there isn't a lot of air in their pixel map. This, in real life, would be about 25 feet high and about 40 feet wide, right? On a video, how big on your screen right now is 8 by 23 pixels, right? So you're getting a very small sample of what your actual content is doing. So one of the things to consider to reduce choppiness is to say, I'm going to introduce space so that when the video plays back over these pixels just aren't rendering, but they're still being played back, right? So it gives you some spacing to allow more sampling across different fixtures, right? Or excuse me, across different pixels in your video. So consider that if you've got a 100 by 100 piece of content, maybe you want to spread out your pixels more across that 100 by 100 instead of keeping them all bunched up. So introducing air can actually help with video playback. So that's that. The number one rule here is I want my pixel map to look as close to reality as I can. Again, this doesn't have to just be for a back wall. If this were my downlight wash, maybe I have a 5x5 series of D60s that are my downlight. I could map them there. So don't think about this as just video playback where I'm going to see something. Think about what other arrangements can be made to map content to your fixtures. So I'm going to hit done, and that will... Yeah.
We had a couple of questions that came in that I think
Sure.
while we're in this display, it would be good to take a look at.
Let's do it.
One is there a way to space automatically when adding the pixels?
There currently is not, no.
Can you manually adjust just one pixel due to a mispatch?
Yeah, absolutely. Once you get them in there, this can be deleted, or you can change the channel. So I'm going to do it to this one so I don't forget the channel number. But if I have that selected and I say, oh, that's actually 901, and I just hit apply, it's just going to apply to that channel, right? So so that's how you would deal with it is by channel selection or by tile selection.
If pixels are stacked, will they both play?
Yeah. So if you've got pixels on top of each other, they're going to play whatever is in that space. I don't love that because when I come back to this map, I have no idea that those things are stacked. I can't think of a reason that I would want that to be. I don't know if Scott has any ideas on, or Rob. Like, I might instead introduce a lot of air and just keep those two pixels next to each other.
Yeah, I try and avoid stacking just because it's difficult to see exactly what they're doing. And then if you need to go back and edit, you have to figure out, oh, here are these layers of pixels, and there's no good tools in the pixel map editor to deal with layers of things.
Yeah, and I'll just we get a lot of requests of like, can I do diagonals? Can I do shapes? Can I do all this stuff? All of these tools were built pre-Magic Sheets. So again, this tool set's about 10 years old. We've kept up with it, but we haven't done any really big rebuilds. Yes, we want to do more interesting layout tools and layers and things like that too. None of that exists right now. So it is a little labor intensive. It can be a little persnickety. That's kind of the way that it is right now. So
as far as the spacing, I'll chime in with something I've found helpful.
yeah.
So when you're introducing air, so the pixel map has no idea of space. It doesn't know if this is a foot across or 100 feet across. It's just that's many pixels. So if I'm using D60s, for example, if that's what we're looking at right here, a D60 is about a foot square if I'm looking at the front of it. So I would build this pixel map saying, okay, a pixel is a foot. So this fixture is here, and it's 8 feet to the next fixture. So I would leave 8 squares in between, or 7 squares in between, just as a rough kind of scaling of the pixel map, and I've had a lot of success using that.
Yeah, I've done similar, but I've also done the opposite, where I've had stuff that's been tightly packed together, but I want a broader sample of my video content because I only have a 4x4 grid, but I still want it to be super dynamic, and 4x4 pixels in a video, it's always going to be around the same color if we're thinking about like a blobby movie thing. And it's going to feel like it's popping as stuff transitions over it. So I'll add a lot of space in there just to make those components sort of twinkle differently. So as you go to play with this stuff, I encourage you to take the exact same pixel map and do it twice. Do a little one, do a big one, run the same content over it, and just feel the differences.
Yeah, and just Rob's example of leaving 8 squares between, you don't have to do, right? Even if they're 8 feet apart, they don't have to be 8 pixels apart. The difference between 2 pixels and 8 pixels might not be much, but it could be more manageable to have a smaller map, or it might get you a better look because when the content is transitioning from patched pixel to patched pixel, there's less space. So just, it's not always, it doesn't need to be a one-to-one example or transition between the two.
Yeah, but it's certainly a way if you're starting fresh off, it's a good rule of thumb, Rob. I like that. Like, if I've got my electrics, I'm just going to do this spacing to start it. But I think the point is well made that there's no scale here. These are pixels in a video. And if, you've got all of your stuff bunched up in this little corner here, and that's where your video is playing, then that's the content that it's going to reproduce. So be aware of that. Play with it. Fill it out. Put air in it. But I think that's the number one thing is people will use a pixel map and feel like it's too flashy or poppy or rapid. And that's because generally you're sampling a very small portion of the video, whereas, you could be stretching that video over, stretching those pixels over a wider sample of that video. So try both. See how they work.
Yeah.
Cool.
There's no right answer.
Yeah, exactly. The points are all made up, and the pixel maps don't matter.
Just got a couple other quick ones.
Yeah.
We've got a question about the color scheme for the maps. So specifically, what's the yellow and the red colors stand for? I think just because the screen is awfully small.
Yeah, no, sure. So the yellow and the red are addresses, patched or unpatched. So, for example, if I were to make this address 1, I guess that is patched. Let me make this address 2/1. And maybe this is a bug too. And then address 5/1. Let me close my editor. Oopsie. Okay, so that's another display bug, right? One or both of these should be red because they're not patched anywhere in the show file. So one would show up red if it's an address that is unused. It would show up gold if it is used somewhere. So use that to your knowledge. And then obviously the kind of EOS blue back here is just an available place where you can put a pixel.
Last question, is your cursor the only tool for moving pixels around, or is there any way to use the arrow keys?
Your arrow keys will move your stage, your space, your view. You cannot use arrow keys to move pixels at this time. So this is a very mouse-driven tool in general, the setup of this. So I've been on gigs where the shop has not sent out a mouse. I always carry a hardwired USB mouse with me. It's a little $5, $6 commodity that has gotten me out of so many troubles because a lot of stuff, this is a sidebar, but EOS in general, and the development team look at what they call in the heat of battle versus setup. And in the heat of battle is stuff that like you're live programming, you're doing something that is accessing the stage immediately. All of that stuff they work very hard to make accessible via keypad or touch or things like that. Things that are more setup driven that maybe you're not doing in front of a room full of people, like setting up a pixel map, like setting up a magic sheet, some of the patch stuff, that the development team has allowed a bit more mouse-driven tools. So that's kind of how those decisions get made from a development side. So just a fun little tidbit. You said that was the last one for now, Ginger?
That is the last one.
Great. So I'm going to really quickly... So we've got this map, right? These are our channels. This is exactly how my stage looks. Better than cats. Now that this map exists, I need a place to control it. I need channels to be able to apply a master layer and content layers to. So what I can do here is say, I'm going to have my server channel, my main channel, be channel 501. And then I'm going to do a couple of layers. I'm going to do 2 of each type here. Again, you can do up to 12, any combination. A media layer is any layer that we play back media, images, videos, GIFs, things like that. And I'm going to say that's 502 and 503. And then my effects layers, I'm just going to say, are 504 and 505. And those are layers that use math to generate content. We'll play with those in a second. There's something that's new in EOS 3.0 that you're seeing. Normally, what we would need to do is go into patch and patch these guys. So in my patch area, I would need to go to channel 501 and tell it that it's a server. And that is located, if we go into our manufacturer, if we find ETC, fixtures, if we find virtual, you can see that there's a server and our different layers here. So if we wanted to patch these manually, we could do that. However, what is nice is in 3.0, as soon as you assign it in your pixel map, it's going to automatically put it in patch for you. So that was a layer of abstraction that got removed in 3.0 to just make setting up a pixel map easier. So if you've dealt with pixel maps in the past, or if you're watching the videos, if you're in 3.0, this is different, and it's an improvement, right? Keep in mind that you don't need addresses here because we're not talking to an external media server. All of this, all the cheese is made together, right? So we don't need to put any sort of DMX or ACN addresses here. We just leave them unpatched because of the type of channel. The console knows how to route that information. Okay. So that's a nice little improvement, I think. You can label your thing here. You have the ability to select interfaces just like you do in patch. So which interface is this pixel map talking to? Is it just ACN? Is it just DMX? Is it just ArtNet? Is it all the above? And then you get some information about how many pixels are used and how many fixtures are used. So this is it. We set up our pixel map. We can set up as many pixel maps as we need, up to 40 to interact with the rig that we're working with. Again, the same channel can live in multiple pixel maps if that's something you want to play with. And so there you go. So so now we're ready to control these things. If I go out into live, I can see my channels 501 through 505, and a couple of other tools that are really, really useful for pixel mapping. The first is your pixel map preview tab. So if you open a tab, the two tabs that I like to show people when using it is pixel map preview, which is here. Again, that's going to show you what the contribution of the pixel map is. And I also like to use ML controls because ML controls will give me the thumbnails that Matthew mentioned of what my video content is. Those will also show up on your encoder displays if you've got encoder displays, but this is a nice way to sort of learn stuff. So the first thing I got to do is I got to bring my master channel on at full, right? This is a master channel. It affects all my layers. So if I don't have it on, I will get no content. And then if I say 502 at full, that is going to bring up my first layer. This is a content layer, so I'm just going to scroll over, and you can see I've got my library here, right? All of my folders and all of my FIPs, whatever they stand for. And I've got this nice little radio button here that if I click on it, it's going to give me a little pop out of all of the content in that space. So this is a quick way to get a thumbnail. I'm going to do my Spyro because I like my spirograph. So you can see it's there. I had the mask on. What the mask does in your pixel map preview is it will either show you the whole staging area, right? Or it will show you only where pixels are. So this is really useful. I'm going to leave it off for now, but we'll show it once we get this stuff moving. So I've selected a file. I've selected, my folder, my file. The other thing is if it's animated, by default, we do playback mode at displayed centered. And I want to loop that forward. I can display the in-frame, loop in reverse. There's a bunch of options of the playback. My playback speed also homes at a slower speed. So I'm going to put my playback speed at 100. And now that's going to play that video at 100% of its speed. We can go above 100%, we can go below, but to just get stuff moving, there we go. And you can see that all of this stuff is just manual data in my channels. So if I were to store this into a queue, it's going to play back just like this, right? My layer has a lot of other overrides. I have mixer mode ability, which allows me to change how I'm mixing between two layers. I've got scale and rotates. Keep in mind that your Z rotate is actually your plane rotate, right? So if you're thinking about it in the augmented way, where our Z axis is vertical, Z rotate means that like you're looking down on the floor. So just keep in mind that that language is a little bit different than it is for a proper drafting space. Other things are some color offsets, right? Your color offsets are filters. Because this is RGB video, if I take my red to 0, it filters out the red. It's not additive. So just keep in mind that that's what that's doing. And again, my intensity here is my opacity. So as I bring that down, this is going to be boring because I don't have anything else behind it. I'll show you opacity in just a second. And then pan and tilt is where is the content on the screen, right? So again, I can move stuff around knowing that my pixels are mostly centered up there. I'm going to do that. And that way when I turn my mask on, I get kind of this radiating effect, right? So that's a quick overview of what the content layers do. Effects layers, when you have an effect layer, you have, instead of video files, you've got these little, a much smaller selection of math. Basically anything that's a rainbow is going to give you a rainbow, right? So if I've got a rainbow spiral, I got a rainbow spiral. If I've got a rainbow Perlin noise, or what I like to call blobby bits, I've got blobby bits. And so if you're doing Mamma Mia, like, this is your jam. This is great. So not always useful for everything, but you can get some interesting stuff, again, if you start to filter colors. Any of these that are blue and red mean you get to select the color. So when I clicked on this guy, I got white on white, and that's because my two color pickers are both honed at white. If I were to do something like an orange and a yellow, maybe I'm starting to get the feel of fire, right? Maybe I can slow that down. Maybe I can add another layer that's a dark gradient. There's actually a fire exercise as part of our video tutorials, so I would encourage you to explore that. The biggest thing that's advantageous about an effect layer is each color also has its own intensity or opacity. So if I reduce the opacity for one of these colors, it's going to let other stuff bleed through a bit, right? If I take it all the way out, I get something like that. So Scott said, maybe your most complex media is multiple layers on top of each other. So play with stacking things. As you're seeing, because channel 504 is higher than channel 502, it's on top of it. That's how stacking layers works. So away you go. Things that I think are useful, and I think we'll talk about in our kind of Q&A, is that all of this stuff can be accessed via palettes and presets. So if you want to be quick, do palettes and presets that are filtered down to just the things you want to do. If my show has a really blue color palette to it, I'm doing something that's more outdoors, I'm going to pick a bunch of content ahead of time that's more blue and maybe not as many red things so I can quickly audition those for my designer. I always have a start here preset, which sets all my content to the right scale. It rotates it, it plays back the right speed. It just lets me know that something is working, and then I can start picking content. So palettes, presets, discrete timing, marking, all the things you can do with channels. This, I think, is where Virtual Media Server is powerful, because your channels and all the things they bring with them are completely accessible. So I would say when you're going to play after today, go wild with those sorts of tools. And maybe you put a delay on your pan tilt as something's coming in, so it comes in and then it goes down. There's a lot of really cool options to play with. So the one other thing that I'll mention, I spoke about this actually with Matthew earlier this week. There's one kind of thing that is you may run into that's difficult with fixtures, and that has to do with where pixel maps are inserted, right? Remember, VMS doesn't know anything about the Fade engine. Right now, I have RGB LED fixtures. They take up 3 DMX addresses, and I put out my red, I put out my green, I put out my blue, and it does the magic, right? That fixture itself does not have an intensity parameter, right? It's not a for intensity RGB. So what's good about that is EOS automatically, for these channels, will create a virtual intensity so we can master those colors, and it handles the DMX on the background, right? So for these fixtures, virtual media serving is going to work. It's great. It's dumb. It just outputs. If you have channels that have intensity parameters, like a D60, like certain color force modes, you will need to turn on the channel at the desk level, because Virtual Media Server doesn't understand right now that intensity. Again, it's a bit of a bummer. It's the way that it works because of the way that it's coded. But that is something that we run into all the time. My LED back wall is doing just fine. My D60s aren't. You've got to come out and turn on those fixtures. Maybe that's a place for a Start Here macro, where it brings those fixtures, it starts some content, you get everything set the way you need to do before you start changing stuff. So just be aware. It's a little bit of a gotcha. Again, we don't think it's ideal either, but it's the way that it's coded currently. With a couple of quick macros, you can get around it pretty easily. The last thing that I kind of want to demo before we get into our Q&A is crossfade. So really quickly, I'm going to take my channels, 701 through 884, and I'm going to put them at full, and I'll make them blue, right? So if I had a magic sheet right now, I would see that these things are blue. Great. You'll notice, because my pixel map doesn't understand desk channel contributions, that I can't see that the blue is there. But what I will get is blue on top of, with this stuff playing on top of it. When desk channels are contributing to output and VMS is contributing to output, its highest takes precedent per color, right? So if I had a fire going, a red and green thing, and I had blue as a desk channel, it's going to look really white because my three colors are mixing to that. There's a parameter on a server channel called crossfade, and crossfade determines who wins between the server and the desk channel. At 0, which is its home, its highest takes precedent. As I go positive, the desk channel will win, right? So now, if I were looking at a real rig, all of these pixels would go blue, right? I've given priority over to the desk channel. If I go all the way to negative 100, the virtual media server is winning, right? So I would just see what I see on my VMS and not on my desk channel. There'd be no blue as a part of that. So that is how you can queue transitions between queue stacks and media, and know that those can be presets as well. So you can really quickly pop between them. The crossfade can happen over time. So it's really good. And I think Scott actually has a really good example of that in all of his stuff. So I'll take a couple of questions, but I know we're getting to be about 12:30, so I want to make sure we have plenty of time to hand the baton over to Scott and have him go through some stuff and open this up. Are there any questions that are pertinent to basic functionality that we want to go over?
Yeah, there's a couple. So we had a couple people ask, so what happens if you assign an already patched channel as a server channel or a layer? Do you get a warning, or do you just patch over it?
It's brand new and I haven't tried it. Why don't we try? I don't know.
You get a warning. It'll tell you this, this fixture type isn't valid.
Oh.
So.
Yeah, that's what I hoped for.
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
It works.
We make stupider mistakes, so, you know.
Yeah.
What else, Ginger?
Let's see. Is there a way to see a still preview of media on the map in the Pixel setup?
No, we don't allow you to overlay any images in pixel mapping setup. So, 10-year-old config tool.
Can you layer it all on a magic sheet? Sure.
Can you layer it all on a magic sheet? We're going to get to that.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a hack that kind of works if you have the right type of fixtures. Okay. Anything else for now, or should we turn it over to Scott? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And Scott, I'm going to pass you the beach ball so that you can share your screen.
Great. So I threw together a quick demo this morning. We'll talk about some things that Nick mentioned. So here we've got the EOS family screen. Left-hand side, we've got our live table patched. I have some RGB fixtures in there. They're just generic 8 bits. And then I have my my server and my layers. Right here in the middle, I've got my pixel map preview. And then over here on the right-hand side, I actually have a magic sheet. So let's do that real quick. So here we've got these channels, right, 1 through 9. These are the channels as they're being shown in the live table. And anything we do to them will be, you know, it's going to show up, right? We're changing the color. We're doing all of that. This is that channel level that Nick was talking about. If I turn my server on, and Nick was talking about having a go-to preset, in this case, it's preset 1, we're not going to see any output on this, right? Because the channel isn't showing us anything at all. So the hack way around this, there's an object in Magic Sheets called SACN. And what that is just, sorry, that is just an object that listens on the network specifically for addresses. So there's a lot of different things that we can target them to. So in this case, since our lights are being output as RGB fixtures, we select RGB, right? You've got intensities in there. You've got some other 16-bit ones, some things with intensity and 16-bit. So there's a lot of different options in there that hopefully will get you what you need. They behave like every other Magic Sheet object, right? You can adjust them, you can give them labels. In this case, I didn't do any of that. But we've got our SACN contribution over here and our channel contribution. And in the SACN section, that's really what the fixtures are doing. So if I turn 1 through 9 on at full, we can see here that they're full in white, right? We're merging with our crossfade parameter, HTP. So it's just showing us everything's on at full. If I take my crossfade parameter down to -100, it's going to give us back that gradient. So there's some really cool ways that we can mix these things together to give us some interesting results. So I have a queue list, and let's see, let's be in Q1, and we're running a rainbow chase, right? We can see that's being played back on the channels, and we can see it in our SACN output, right? Effect 917, channels 1 through 9. Great. So I can start my virtual media server in the background. And in this case, I have my crossfade parameter set to full, which means it's not contributing to output at all. Crossfade parameter is a parameter like anything else, right? We can control it manually. We can type in crossfade at 0. And now it's merging HTP. Because our pixel map is outputting full white, that's what we're going to see. So let's sneak that away. And in this case, I have a submaster here. And what it's going to do when I click bump is it's actually going to bump the crossfade parameter down to -100. So there's some timing associated with this. Sorry, there's no timing associated with this one, but there could be. But what this lets me do is this lets me override all of the contributions coming from the channel, and I can say hit to white. You know, if you're in a busking scenario and you need to go, oh, here's my hit to white, maybe this is a way you want to do it so that you can say, no matter what's happening, my pixel map is taking control. And this gets really really interesting when we look at some other things. So here we have an effect being applied to our crossfade parameter. You know, it's just an absolute effect going from -100 to full. And we can change that like any other effect. So now all of a sudden we're getting this white rainbow effect that is combining two sources. So we could say, oh, I want to change the color of my, gotta grab the right layer, of my layer, and I want it to be red. So let's put all of these down to red. And now our effect is a rainbow on red, right? This is something that might take a lot of time to program just with an effect, because the rainbow is still running even when we hit to that server control. So there's some really great ways that we can share control between these two things. Let's see, next up, so we're running that in the effect. And we can bump that, right? You know, we saw that. And, you know, maybe this is an easier way, maybe it isn't, but it's another tool in your toolbox. So here we are, and now we've faded between those two things. So let's go back, we're here in white. And what this next cue is doing is it's gonna fade our color parameters inside of our virtual effects layer from full white in both colors to being red and orange and going to our fire effects like Nick was talking about. Also, the crossfade parameter is going to fade to -100. What I really like about this is if I'm doing something with my bump, right? I'm bumping these, I'm bumping the pixel map crossfade parameter, right? It's going from full to -100. No matter when I hit go on my next cue, that transition is still going to be really nice. So when I hit bump now, nothing's happening because our crossfade value faded to -100. But that transition between, oh, here's our rainbow effect to here's our color effect, here's our fire effect is really nice. I find this useful because it lets you preset things and fade. You're essentially fading between two different effects engines, which is really, really powerful. Something to play around with after we're done with all this. The other question that we get a lot, especially in class, is how do I make something that looks like a VU meter, right? You want your lights to react the way the audio meter does. Well, we can do that with a pixel map. So in this cue, I've stopped my effects and I've turned my channels off. We've got our virtual server just outside the bounding box of our fixtures. And we've got channel 12 turned on at full. And channel 12 has a piece of content. It's just this white box. It's perfect for what we're going to do now, which is we're going to hit bump on this other submaster that I have, which is timing. And all of a sudden, we're getting this effect that runs up and down. And since this is a submaster, we can assign time to it, up time of 1, dwell time of 0, down time of, say, 1. Is that for the right one? Yes. And when I bump this, that's going to do that as well, right? That respects the timing and all of the other things that we're normally used to with programming lights and programming moving lights, that, oh, all of these tools are still valid. So this is cool, but a VU meter isn't white. So what we can do in my next cue is we can change to an effect layer. Nick was talking about these. These are those red and blue ones. And I've set the color to also be red and blue. So now when I hit bump, I get an entirely different kind of effect. And this is because I'm bumping the tilt parameter on the virtual server itself. I'm not bumping the layer. What this means is that all of the content has moved. It's not just that one layer. So no matter what's happening, this bump is going to take my tilt from wherever it is to 0. So I can run this manually, and we can see that too. Can run it back down. Well, this is a pixel map content, right? This can move, things can change in it. So what if it was doing a rainbow effect and doing this VU meter also? So now all of a sudden we're getting something that's really super dynamic just by changing 2 colors, right? We're changing the playback. We're changing how things are. We're just changing the effects, right? In this case, I switched from channel 13 to 14 just because it's easier. But we could stack all of this stuff on top of each other. So if I bring 13 back, we can say, let's make 13 Nick's favorite blobby noise. And now 14, bring the intensity down. Now we're getting a whole different thing just by changing 3 parameters. I find this really useful in a busking scenario, right? You're changing one thing and you're getting a lot of different value out of it. So it's some really good tools to be able to get a wide variety of looks. Any questions? And then I want to talk about some more bigger pixel mappy type things.
It doesn't look like there's anything that is directly with this. I see a few questions in here, but why don't we forge on and we'll come back to them.
Great. I just wanted to talk about some more concept-y type stuff and to give some examples of maybe when you would use a pixel map over an effect.
Got it.
Because I don't think we've really talked about that. Do we have time?
Yeah, why don't we, so we have about 20 minutes left. We'll let people get off the hog as we normally do. But why don't we do this? Why don't we quickly talk about some of these applications?
Okay.
We'll answer a couple of quick questions, and then we can stay on and chat with people for a few more minutes after time. If you want to run off the hog, hog. If you want to stick and listen to us, you can do that as well. So yeah, go ahead. What do you want to talk about?
I did a show in the fall. It was called A Christmas Carol, and everyone does a version of Christmas Carol or has done it in their life. The interesting thing about this one is there were 700 individually controlled tungsten lanterns spread throughout the stage in the house. And they had done this production previously in London with about 200 lanterns. So we added quite a bit more because, it's Broadway. That's what you do. And all of the effects on these lanterns were pixel maps. So all of those individual flickers that we were getting out of these tungsten lanterns were a pixel map that was just playing back one of the built-in pieces of content, which was great because no matter what we did, we were still controlling them in a way that led us to this next part, which is the designer had an idea. And normally when I say that, I say it, oh, designer has a new idea, we're all in trouble. But this one was really, really awesome. And that was that there was going to be ripples from center out. Now, with 700 lanterns spread across a 2-dimensional grid, I could figure out the channel grouping to do this. But that would be a huge amount of work. So in that case, the solution was to have a piece of content that zoomed open to give it the intensity part. But then we also wanted them to fade out. So we put another piece of content on top of that was actually a mask. So it was just intensity at 0. Or sorry, it's color at 0, intensity at full. so that when it zoomed out, it kind of looked like a donut. And we could have done this with custom content, but then you have all of those things that Nick talked about with custom content, right? You have to make sure it's on everyone's Nomad. You have to make sure it's on the primary and the backup. But we were able to combine these two layers and just get the same result without custom content, which worked really, really well. It was a super successful implementation of pixel mapping. And fingers crossed we do the show again, because it was a lot of fun. Yeah. Nick, any other thoughts?
I think that's good. I think, do you want to talk, and maybe Rob, you have some thoughts too about sort of, when do you make the decision to use a pixel map versus using the effect engine? When do you start working down the path of one and bail because it's not getting you the results you want? What's that relationship between programming with effects and programming with a pixel map?
For me, I typically make that choice. I try and make that choice in prep, right? I see the plot and it's, oh, here's this two-dimensional thing. As soon as we get more than just, here's a cyc or here's something that needs to behave in an upstage, downstage manner and a left-right manner, that's when I'll typically go, oh, we need a pixel map. And that creates a lot more work for me, but the payoff is typically a lot better than sitting there and typing out channel numbers to getting groups to go properly with effects. So it's one of those things of, as soon as I see something that needs to work in more than one dimension, pixel map right away. So I think, yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree. I've done a couple of shows where I saw the layout of the pictures and I'm like, oh, this is a pixel map. So in the show prep, went ahead and built a pixel map. Some of those were never used. Standard effects worked fine, but had the need arisen, I'm not trying to build a pixel map in the middle of tech. That's
like one of the worst things.
In the heat of battle, as Nick said.
Yeah, as soon as you go to grab the mouse, like, all right, I need time. Yeah. Nick was talking about mapping downlights before. That was something that I've done really successfully with rush pars. There was a show a couple years ago called Donna Summer, and we had, I think it was an 8x6 grid of just LED downlights. And the show had originally been programmed on a 676, so we switched it over to EOS for Broadway. And part of that was recreating all of the effects for this show on the EOS. And that worked out better with the pixel map than it did the effects, right? Instead of saying, all right, here's this specific effect grouping for this single effect, pixel map, here's some content. If you want I call it a loading screen type thing where it's going around like this, that's really, really easy to do as a pixel map, right? Nick's swirly thing that he was talking about, all of a sudden it's like, all right, you just get a different piece of content and you've changed the effect in quite a drastic way.
Yeah, and I think that's something that especially as we get into something like Donna Summer, which was these faster, poppier musicals, things that have to happen quickly. Changing content is fast, right? All you're changing is one parameter, and away you go. So I think that's amazing. Keep in mind that content is like a scroller, though. So if you're live changing from file 5 to file 19 over 20 seconds, you're going to click through all the stuff in between. That might be where you'd want to prep a secondary layer to do that transition. So yeah, but I think that like, if you're doing stuff that's popping and going fast, a zero count content change happens instantaneously. So,
yeah. And it's, the designer says, I don't like how that looks. Spin your encoder to the next piece of content, and all of a sudden you've got something that's entirely different. right? Right now I'm playing back one of those swirly things that Nick was talking about, but we can go, well, maybe that's not right scale-wise, but we can change the content right away, and all of a sudden we're getting an entirely different effect. Like, here we are. It's something totally different. And all of this changes when you get down into the lower effects with color, right? Here's something that probably won't look really good, but who knows? Maybe it's appropriate for the moment.
Yeah.
Nick, you kind of touched on this briefly, but like this is where palettes can be really helpful too. Like you can build zoom palettes, speed palettes, playback, stop, forward, back, that you can use on any piece of content in any show you ever do for the rest of your life.
Yeah, all of the
really quick to change between.
All of the tools that I bring with me from show to show, those palettes, I do that too for the virtual media server, right? It feels like programming a moving light, which is really good in some ways, right? All of those tools that you used to that you learn in classes level 1 through 4, where it's, all right, here's our building blocks. Those are still valid. Those tools don't go away just because the name of the fixture you're programming has changed, right? It says virtual layer version 1.0. Okay, all of those palettes, all of those presets are super useful. I will say something that Nick was talking about, the open server idea. That's a preset that I have. Normally it's not preset 1, but it is in the show file. The open server is an absolute preset, right? When I say channel 11, open server, there's no reference there. I don't want that to ever change. This is just getting me to that starting point so I can say, oh, I've got something playing back and I know it's set up properly.
Yeah, I'll bring up something just because it came to my brain. One of the things to be cautious of is video slowing down, right? So video likes to play at 100%, and that will get you the speed, but that may be clippy. You're kind of seeing this thing here that Scott's playing where it's like kind of chunking, and that's because we've slowed it down to 5 or 10% of its normal playback speed, and we're just stretching those frames out, right? So we're going 1 to 1 to 1 to 1 to 1, and that is not fun. So there's a new tool in 2.9 called Blend, which is at the server layer, and that introduces fade time between each frame. So now we're kind of cross-fading each of those frames instead of just slowing down the video and snapping. So if you're running video below 100%, you may want to turn on Blend and see if it can help you out. Again, I don't know if it's our video share or if it's still that way. At a certain point, Blend isn't going to be able to help, and at certain significant changes in pixels, Blend isn't going to be able to help. So again, pick your content, add air. There are other ways that you can kind of deal with that. But be aware that video likes to play at 100%. The super intricate morphing tools between frames and everything, media servers do that great, and there are tons of media servers that are happy to have you using them. Blend is, again, another step in we're trying to make it easier before you get to a media server, but it's sort of, that's the tool that it is. So yeah, but I'll also say, just hopping on to sort of the preset palette bandwagon, the other thing that I will always use are snapshots, right? I don't always need to see my pixel map contribution, especially if I have a view of the stage. I don't always need magic sheets that deal specifically with that stuff, right? Snapshots are a great way to say, oh, we're going to be dealing with this pixel map or that pixel map or whatever. Set your monitors up so you're playing with just that tool. You have all the tools you need. Maybe your palettes and presets go to the location where those are stored. Maybe your pixel map preview and some other tools open. Maybe your live channel screen is filtered down to just those channels. There's a good way to set that up to let you concentrate on those tools and then go back out to your big thing. So I talked about it in a series a while ago, but if you're going to use pixel mapping, you don't need to have the pixel map tools open all the time. Use snapshots to help guide what you're doing in the moment, and then back out to your general programming look. So.
Yeah, totally agree with all that. When you're shifting gears to pixel maps, just, turn that gear, switch whatever you need to change over to control pixel maps in a better manner, right? Nick's saying run your snapshot, have a couple macros that populate maybe in front of your CIA. So all of a sudden you can say, oh, I need to deal with color 2, right? Our virtual effect layers don't have just one color. Those have 2 colors. It's helpful if I open color again. But those have colors 1 and 2. So maybe having macros for red 2, green 2, and blue 2 pop up as soon as you change your snapshot are going to really help you be faster.
Yep. There's a question that came in.
Yeah, we've got a couple.
Oh, we got a couple minutes. I guess what I'll do now is it's 5 till. So for those of you that are running off to Hog, thank you for joining. Tell Megan and Noah we said hello. So we'll keep going. I'm going to keep recording so that this will be a part of the video if you have to go. But yeah, thanks for joining. Join Rob next week for some augmented deep gig, and stay well. So we're gonna continue some questions. I just saw one really quick. Sorry, Ginger, I'm stealing your job real quick. That I think would be a good talking point for Scott.
Yeah.
And Rob and I probably have some opinions too. Bryce asks, do you generally store virtual media server layer data in presets for your Q stack, or just as building tools? So Scott just said, like, I'm using this as a get it going, but I never want to reference it. When are you choosing to use references? When are you not? And what management are you using around that stuff? Why do you make choices to do things a certain way? I have some answers, but I want you to say stuff too.
I will typically always try and store things into a preset if I'm going to use it again for a virtual media server. The Christmas Carol I was talking about, that flicker effect, we called Hogwarts because, well, it felt like the Great Hall with all those lanterns in there. And as soon as I ran my snapshot to get me into a pixel map, it changed my preset direct select to being from where I store all of my presets for my moving lights to being where I was storing stuff for virtual media server, which was great because I could change really quickly and go, all right, here's all of these things, no matter what scene they're used in. As far as storing in a preset versus absolute data, that's a really personal choice. So anyways, it really depends on the situation, and it's something that you have to gauge, right? If I'm using, let's go back to that ripple out example. The start was a preset, and then the finish was also another preset. And those were called bong start, bong ends, because the ripple went with the audio bongs. But that was a good use of a preset for me because that was something that I used over and over and over. We probably had that same effect happen 10 times throughout the show as Scrooge was being introduced to new characters. When they entered, it would happen. So it was one of those things of, oh, we're using this again, I'm going to store it in a preset. Does that, as Nick would say, long story?
No, I think that's good. I think the same. Sorry, Rob. I think the same questions anytime you store a palette or a preset. The two things that I always go to are what Scott just said. Am I going to use it again? And getting back to that, like quickly and easily. And for me, do I need context, right? The thing about palettes and presets is they give you a label, which takes those numbers, those collections of numbers, and allows you to say something about them. When Scott was doing the crossfade demo, I realized, like, one of the things that I do is I can never remember which negative 100 and positive 100 do what. And so I never access those through the encoders or ML controls. I'm always accessing those through a preset because I can label it and be like, channels are always on, or pixel map is always on, or HTP. I can bring some, like, you know, when you're doing a million different things with a large lighting rig, trying to, like, remember what all these little persnickety things do can be difficult. So certainly labels is a context. But as Scott said, these tools are no different than any other moving light tool. So having palettes that are locked are useful. Having palettes that are absolute are useful. Using global palettes so you can take this stuff with you, show to show to show. I think there's a significant advantage in treating them like a moving light. There's some disadvantages too, in that it's video. It's not a moving light, but it's a good frame for how we work. Sorry, Rob, I cut you off. You were going to say something.
No, and kind of same thing you were just saying. Like, think of it as a moving light. Like, when would you use an absolute palette for a moving light versus a reference palette or preset? So, like I was saying, I might have some speed presets or palettes that are absolute. I never want to update those because I'm taking them from show to show. But then if I'm working on a specific moment, like Bong 1, maybe I start with speed medium, but then I tweak it a little. I put that in a new preset. And I do want to be able to update that for this specific show, which is how I think about any presets or palettes for moving lights.
Yeah. Ginger, do we want to answer some questions?
Sure, we've got a few here. That would be good.
I also have in my back pocket, whenever we're ready to talk about super secret dealing with media content on a network, I've got some stuff. So
you got some stuff. All right. Well, speaking of moving lights, we had a couple things come in about that. One is, can you map moving lights as pixels? Could you talk about any considerations and challenges if you do that? And then kind of going on similar lines, can you do more than just color type effects? Can you do some zoom or pan and tilt moves?
With a pixel map, yeah, good question. So yes, you can absolutely make moving lights be pixels. And this might answer the other question, which is that will only affect the color system. So you can't, for example, have a wave ripple through a pixel map and have it affect your iris or your pan. It's something we've discussed for a long time. So now you would have to use a traditional effect for those sorts of things. So yeah, we're always hatching harebrained ideas about things like that. We'll see how quickly they come in. The only consideration that I would want to make with a moving light is what I talked about with the intensity parameter, right? You're going to have to bring those intensities up at the desk channel level in order to see those. That can be a good thing, that can be a bad thing, but just be aware of that. So I don't know, Scott, do you have any other thoughts on considerations for moving light?
Be careful, right? Like, if you're using an arc source moving light, you're physically moving the dowser inside of it. That is very, very quick to react, but it's not going to be as fast as an LED fixture. If everyone remembers the C changers, they were CMYG additive mixing, subtractive mixing. It was just an attachment you would add onto a source 4. I tried pixel mapping those once, and it really didn't work. They weren't fast to respond, and no matter what we did, it didn't look right. Because, like Nick has been saying, video content wants to play back at full speed, and video content is for pixels, right? Those things change really, really fast. That's a lot faster than a C changer or a physical wheel can move. So if you're programming a show that's meant to run for a long time, maybe that's something you want to take into consideration, right? If the electrician has to replace a dowser wheel every week, they're going to come back and kill you. Like, there's no way around it. So
Well, and I've been on some gigs too where you take what the shop has because you have a budget, right?
yeah,
So you're popping off with some old BL5s or something, and like getting those mechanically to keep up is
Yeah.
a challenge in the moment. But like you said, the maintenance, and especially with older users, you can run into an issue. If you're thinking about incandescent, same sort of thing, right? Incandescents will respond pretty quickly, especially if you preheat them. But if you're popping them on and off a lot through a sequence, you're going to blow more lamps. So maybe running those, preheating them and running them at a less than full value could extend that potentially as a thing, right? So so think about the physical nature of these things. LEDs, because they're digital, are, like Scott said, they're super reactive. And anything physically moving parts or filaments.
Yeah.
So, yeah, good point.
A couple others. Is there a standard or best practice for marking servers and layers?
I mean, I would say the same way that you would mark a moving light, right? If you don't want to see the move, if you've got content that's at home and you're fading it up as you're fading that content into place, you're going to see it moving. We treat virtual servers and virtual layers just like moving lights and LEDs, where if the intensity is at 0 and there's a change in the parameters, you can mark it. So all the same rules apply, a lot of the same macros apply, but one of the things that you can't get with a moving light that you can, which I think Scott was deft at describing, is sort of that ability to hide stuff behind a desk channel with the crossfade. Or to hide stuff behind another layer. Those are kind of bonuses that movers don't give. Do you have any experience, Scott, with like how do you generally try and deal with it?
Yeah. It's pretty much exactly the same as marking a moving light, except that the crossfade parameter doesn't mark, right? This is something that you need to manually set, maybe in a specific part, to say, oh, I need to set this crossfade parameter to full so that when I fade up in the next cue, I can then just only adjust the crossfade parameter. It's a little bit of a mind twister because you now have two things that are controlling whether or not light is actually being output from your fixtures. And the marking doesn't make sense with the crossfade parameter, so it doesn't apply. So that's just a gotcha that you need to remember. And like Nick was saying, macros are helpful for that. Crossfade at full, record only part 19 maybe is something that's really useful.
Yeah.
So yeah. And then put a label on it because you should always label everything.
Yes, label.
Couple others. Could you share a basic pixel map that has multi-cell fixtures?
Could we talk about it, or?
Yes, I think talking about it.
Yeah, we've had several questions about multi-cell.
Yeah.
So I think we could just.
Okay.
Yeah, Scott, I'll talk about it if you just want to show it. Basically, when we're selecting a pixel in the editor and we're in that configuration area, you can make one of those pixels be a cell. So if you patch a fixture in multi-cell mode, and that's the big caveat, right? And you can see Scott doing that right now. You have to find a fixture that has a multi-cell profile, and you need to patch it that way so that the desk understands that there's cells. So when you go into your pixel map editor, when you select one of the things, one of the pixels in your little patch area, your cell mapping can be cells or channels, right? So you can see, and if he applies that, when you zoom in on those, you'll see that those are all individual cells: 51 cell 1, cell 2, cell 3, cell 4.
And then it continues on. Right.
Yeah.
We don't have anything patched. I selected more than I had, and it keeps going because it doesn't know.
Yeah, because there are no cells in patch. No, that's true. The other thing to consider is if you haven't patched with multi-cell, let's say you have a 6-cell fixture and you've just done 6 channels, that's fine too. We can just put those channels in, right? 61, 62, 63, 64, 65. So either way that you patch it, it's good to go. But if you're planning on using cells in your pixel map, you need to have cells in patch. So just be aware of that.
Cool. This may be a question that several folks have, but Brian stated it very nicely. He's finding it difficult to master these concepts because he doesn't have capture and he doesn't have any mappable fixtures. He understands that conventionals can be applied, but he's just not seeing the potential for that. You guys talk about a little bit more?
Yeah, I can grab that one. So if you want to play with it, first of all, say if you don't have capture, so our training materials that you can download, the current show file does have a pixel map in it, and it is a capture file that you can use and use our Mind the Gap rigs. That's a good way to use a non-rectangular pixel map. Actually, there's 2 in there, right? Next, there's the backdrop plus the letters. Yeah, so there's 2 different pixel maps in there. And then, so we said this earlier, so you certainly can use a pixel map on an intensity-only rig, like the lanterns in the Christmas Carol or the A lamps we were talking about earlier. So if you had a rig full of R64s or Source 4s, the Kanye rig from a few years back comes to mind, you certainly could use a pixel map. That doesn't necessarily mean you need to use a pixel map. If you have what I would consider a standard dance plot with backlight, side light, front light, there may not be a use for you to run an intensity effect over part or all of that rig. There might be, but there may not be. So this is just, it is a tool. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to use this tool to accomplish the goals of your show. You may be able to get what you need from a simple effect on your backlight with much less setup than this requires.
Yeah, and that's why I encourage like playing with it, see if it is going to be useful for you, kind of know how it works and what it's capable of, so that if you do find yourself in a production where it looks like it'll be useful, you'll kind of know that. You'll have that in the back of your head. The first time pixel mapping was used in the real world was the National in London did a production of Frankenstein, and they had this huge chandelier of light bulbs that kind of cascaded over the audience and toward the stage. And they did, at the top of the show, they had this like epic ripple, kind of exactly what Scott was describing, where it like, there's this thunderous clap and this ripple of light came through these several hundred light bulbs. That was totally doable with an effect or with queuing, but it would take in forever. And so, the programmer recounting the story was like, yeah, we like set it up, we did the thing, we did the ripple, we're like, okay, moving on in 5 minutes, and everyone was like, no, you can't, you got to program that, and they're like, no, we're done, we got it. So I think that incandescence, again, if you think about it as a secondary effects engine, it can be really useful. There's a show that I know someone who was programming where there was like a brownout, right? Like, so there was a kind of flickering of lights with impending doom disaster. And they used intensity for that so that they could get that kind of organic, poppy, not everything happening at once feel, which I thought was a really cool application for it. So I actually think that's where people kind of shoehorn themselves in, is like, I need to have a back wall with 500 pixels that are all fully color changing. And I think that you can do it on, 10 A lamps and still get some really interesting results. I know some game shows similar to what Scott was saying, the meter type thing, for like a game show with LEDs or bulbs. Think about how you can apply media to a grouping of lights, even with conventionals. The other thing I'll say, sorry, before we split off is Rob mentioned Mind the Gap has a patch for that stuff. Also, don't forget Scott's ACN hack, right? You can build a little ACN preview in your pixel map as long as you're connected to a network, even if you're not connected to a real lighting network. It just needs to be like EOS doesn't output if it doesn't see a network. So even if you're connected to your home Wi-Fi, it's going to work. So that's a good way to do it as well.
Yeah, I'd say something along those lines of figuring out how it works and understanding why you would use it. Try maybe take an effect that you've written with the effects engine and see if you can recreate it with the pixel map, right? Like you've got your 3-circuit chase. Here it is in a pixel map, right? We've got all of these bars scrolling across a piece of content. Is it better to make it with a pixel map? Maybe, maybe not. It really depends on the situation that you're in. But saying, here are two tools that do similar things. How can I take the one that I know and take those ideas and those results and get that out of the other engine is something that's really, really valuable to do. And unfortunately, we have the time to do that right now. But I'd say comparing the two and trying to get the same results using a different tool is a good way to understand it better.
Well said. We have other questions we want to tackle?
Yeah, do we have time for one more here? We've got one from Don. He's asking, are there any considerations for running the same media file on more than one map?
I don't think so.
Yeah, if I'm understanding the question correctly, it's if I have the same piece of content playing on this map and on this map, is there anything I really need to worry about? I don't think so. I think it'll handle all that fine. But they do have to be. I think you can do it. You can do it on different layers too. So you can run the same piece of content on different layers and then scale them and speed them and do all that stuff differently. So it's playing those things completely separately, even though it's accessing the same file. So I can't think of anything that would cause any heartache.
Yeah,
but we can play. We'll play and get back to you.
Yeah.
What other questions do we have?
See, is my media regulated to the length of the media, or can I loop?
So you can loop. There is play loop forward, play loop reverse. Those are playback options that you can grab. There's also what's called an in point and an out point. And so that allows you, those are parameters that allow you to trim the media. So if you have like a really interesting video file that's doing some interesting things and then it like pops, but you want to loop, try pulling your out point into to trim it a little bit. Again, at a certain point, you may have to take it off board to do some video editing, but in point and out point at least allow you to choose what portion of the video you're playing and is looping. I'll also use in point and out point for one-offs. You know, if I need something to just hit in a certain way and there's a slice of video that does it, that's a great way to also just trim that down and say, I only need it to go for a second, and that's the slice that I want. Question?
I think we're okay.
I see a couple in the unanswered. Why is it not letting me scroll? Devin had asked one a while ago. Hi, Devin. I hope you're still here. Sorry. I think this is really relevant because of the way that layers stack and take priority, meaning one on top of another. How would you recommend patching the high to low layers with virtual layers, effects layers, stuff like that? My personal preference is I like to do 2 every other. So my first 2 channels are going to be an effect layer. My second 2 layers are going to be a content layer, effect layer, content layer, and so on. And then I'm always trying to program to the center of that media server, right? So that I always have room to reveal stuff behind me or a lower channel number, or reveal stuff in front of me, a higher channel number. So as you program, you're kind of constantly playing this dance of bringing the active layer to try and stay center, if that makes sense. So it allows you to constantly have space above and beyond. What you don't want to do is get to like your 12th layer and need to bring something on top of it.
I've done it. It's a miserable place to be. You have to go backwards and start all over and just move everything down one or up one, and it's not fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you constantly play that game. What order do you generally do, Scott? Do you do something similar?
It kind of depends on the show, but typically I'll do a bunch of virtual layers, then an effects, I'll do virtual layers, effect layers, then some more virtual layers, just because I find that's how I'm typically working, and the masking tools, which I want on top, I get from the virtual layer, right? Not from the effect layer. If I'm trying to mask something out, I'm going to do it with a virtual layer, not an effect layer. So I want those closer to the top.
Yeah, very good. Rob, do you have any organizational preferences that you tend to do?
Same as you guys. Like just the starting in the middle, I think is the important takeaway here.
And it's a dance, right? It's through the whole show file. You got to kind of keep an eye on it. So, Don asks if moving the patch works same way as the rest of the rig. Kind of. So in regard to what we're discussing, yeah, if you had programmed layers too high and you wanted to go back to the show file and move them, you could do that, but that's moving everything everywhere. So that doesn't necessarily, at the end of the day, you have 12 layers, and if you programmed in the lower layers, you're going to replace that content. So be careful about that. I would also say that pixel maps don't auto change. So if you have my pixel map, which is pointed at 701 through 884, and I go into patch and I move 701 to 1701 through 1784, or through 1884, the pixel map is pointed at those channels. It doesn't move. It doesn't renumber those channels like it does everywhere else in the desk. So just be really careful. If you are moving channels that are referenced by a pixel map, you have to go back in and rebuild that pixel map.
And the pixel map will tell you. It'll say there's a fixture type mismatch over here where it says server channel or media layer channels. It'll let you know, at least in 3.0, that you've done something that you probably shouldn't.
Yeah. Very good.
Could you guys, there's one question that came in. Could you talk about the differences between the effect layer 1.0 and 1.1?
Yeah. And though it's a firmware version for your moving light, right? We added some functionality in 1.1. It came out like a year after we did the initial release, and I don't really remember the differences. I just always patch 1.1 because it's the newest. Does anybody else use 1.0? We keep it in there for show file compatibility, right? The number one gold standard is never break a show file to the best of our ability. So yeah, but just patch 1.1. There's no reason to use 1.0 that I can think of.
And then there's one up here, sorry that we missed it. It says, would you say it's cleaner to program masks versus intensity, especially when you're using quick cues?
Yeah, masks can get you things like shapes, right? If Scott's example of a circle was perfect, right? If we want a ring to emulate out, trying to do that with groups, again, it can be done. It's going to be so tedious. So masks are really, really good for that. The other thing is you can't do crossfade per channel, basically. You can't say I want my crossfade up, but to ignore these other channels. So crossfade is sort of an all or nothing map. So if you're going to be running some other effect through a pixel map and you need to control the intensities, if they're fixtures that have intensities, you could deal with that in your Q stack. But why not just use a mask, right? And that's why the files in the library 0, that's why a lot of those things are just like rings and triangles and circles and squares, is they're meant to be masks for layers that are behind them. They're not, if you want a white triangle as part of your thing, great. but really those are designed as masking elements, right? So use your triangles and your squares on a higher numbered layer, and use your mixer mode in order to play with some of those things, because your mixer mode has a bunch of different options, and I have found that just playing with them makes a clearer point than talking about them.
Yeah,
if you don't have more than one layer active.
Yeah, there's a great thing in the manual that shows you what all the mixer modes do. But if you just need to quickly mask something out, just take the color to 0. Right here I've got this triangle mask. We bring the color back up, we can see it. But since it's on top with no RGB values, it's going to say nothing comes past me. And that's not even a factor of the mix mode, right? We're still in our over mode, right? There's our mask. We've just taken color to 0. But
yeah, that's a good point to bring up, and I think something to just kind of remember is the difference between intensity, which is opacity, which allows other things to peek through, and video black, right? Like all of your LEDs at 0, your LEDs, your red, green, blue filters at 0 is black, and it will still prevent you from seeing the stuff behind it. Whereas intensity at 0 is opacity; it will let you see everything. So, good point. I can't believe we didn't cover that sooner, but it's good. It's important. And black is a color palette. Who thought we'd ever need that?
yeah.
Cool. Any other things coming through?
So there's one going back to the moving light discussion that we had. Somebody's wondering, could you not use addresses in the pixel map patch for an iris zoom parameter, or does the effects engine still need to know that it's pointed at a color parameter?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, absolutely. If you track down the address of that iris and put it in there, you'd be good to go. It's just not intuitive, right? It's not where we really want it to be. So yeah, and we've done things where we've done, moving lights are a great example. We did this 100 years ago when Bring It On was on Broadway. There were 2 pixel maps that were exactly the same. One was color, one was intensity, right? So that they could do different effects based on color changes or flickering lights or both. So addresses are still useful when you're trying to separate that stuff out, especially with moving lights. But when you start getting into other parameters, you can do it. It's just a lot of overhead, and I want us to do better, and I think we will in the long run. We don't think that that's the best solution for those parameters, I guess, is kind of the thing. But good question. Cool. Anything else before we sign off? Cool. All right. Well, any parting shots or any words from Scott or Rob? Oh, I was going to do all the Hacky Network stuff. You're right. Thank you, Matt. You always keep me on track. So here's the unpublished thing. I can't decide whether I'm not going to stop recording, but this is a do it at your own risk thing. So here's the deal. Keeping media synchronized on a multi-console system is really difficult. And as a programmer, it's technically your job. And if you're interfacing with a video department that's constantly changing content and moving stuff around, like, it's a nightmare very, very quickly. So what has been done for shows with a lot of devices in it is there's sort of a master laptop or a master computer that gets plugged into the network on the same IP scheme. Because all of the consoles are Windows 7 devices behind them, you can map their network drive, right? So basically what you do in this scenario is you set up a computer on the network, you map every other device's drive, and you map the media archive because that's what you care about. You can then use a synchronization piece of software to sync a master folder to all of those devices, right? And that will keep your media in sync kind of in the background. The big caveats to this are that if you delete everything or you change something and it changed on all your devices, that's that, right? There's no undo, there's no anything. It is file transfer at its rawest form. You need to be really, really careful about managing that library. If someone else is managing that library, has access to that library, and they dump a whole bunch of content on it, and up your hard drives on your systems, again, you need to do this at your own risk and have somebody who knows what they're doing manage it. The biggest thing is that Windows doesn't care the amount of bandwidth that it's going to take up when it's transferring files. It will eat up as much space as it can to transfer the files as quickly as possible. That's fine if you're on a coffee, right? If you're on a break and you got 20 minutes and you're just going to resynchronize the devices, if you've got software that's smart enough to only sync changes, I recommend that. But basically, it's possible that if you're running a rehearsal or a performance, that your performance to your output will be rendered low, or it could cause a network crash, right? You could flood the network and cause a lot of issues. So this is not a real-time operation. This is not something that you want to do when you're trying to do a run-through or when you have the director in the room who's wanting to see things work as you want them to work. This is a background function that you can kind of hack into our Windows 7 architecture and map those the media archives. So it has been done. The people that have done it have been very smart about it. If you call phone support and say that you lost a show, they're going to laugh at you because this is not ETC supported in any way. We do not allow you to access Windows in any way unless under super special circumstances, and you're usually on the phone with phone support at that point. So doable, yes. You need a little bit of your own intelligence and a little bit of guts to do this. And know that right now we won't support it. We cannot be responsible for third-party access to our systems. But it's there. So that was the hacky bit. Any other thoughts on that?
Be careful. If you're doing what Nick says and you've got it managed properly and everything's great, you're still on a lighting network. It is designed to send ArtNet, ACN, DMX. It's not really designed to transfer files. So as soon as someone accidentally creates a loop in your network, you've got a whole bunch of problems. Now, maybe worst case scenario, they created that loop at the top of your break. You don't realize it until you get back and your synchronization is still trying to happen. You're kind of screwed because then you have a choice. Do you stop the synchronization and maybe some files are transferred, maybe they're not? Maybe your primary console has no content left, right? Depending on how you configure this, you can end up in some really dangerous scenarios.
Yeah, and that's really why we don't support it. It's not a feature that's built into the desk. It's a Windows hack. So, with great power comes great responsibility. That's all I'll say.
Yeah.
Cool. I saw one more come in.
Yeah, there's
quickly, and then I think we'll sign off. Yeah.
Yeah, there's one more. Will effects like 904 still work on the virtual server channels, or do I need to build new effects?
No, I think that's one of the things that's kind of interesting and exciting is you can apply effects to your servers and layers. So if something like a wave effect or a circle effect, that's going to move that pan tilt value, and it's going to take your content and actually move it around or do waves. So absolutely, play with effects on top of your server and your layers and see what you can get. You can get some really interesting things. Yeah, there's a little yo-yo.
Yep, just effect 904. So you can do it.
Very good. Well, I want to thank Scott for being our special guest. Thank you for your contribution.
Thanks for having me.
Thank
thanks,
you,
Scott.
as always, for being good. Ginger, thank you. We'll be back next week with Rob Crane doing Augmented Getting Started. If you have more detailed questions, don't hesitate to reach out. nick.gunsman@etcconnect.com. Also, don't forget we do have video series for the education of virtual media servers. So feel free to hop in. Happy playing, and we'll see you at the next one. Very good. Thanks, everybody.